What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is a hospitality hero to many in our industry. She's highly skilled at architectural design. She believes that good design is good business. She is the head of design strategies for the Americas for 14 out of the 17 global brands at InterContinental Hotels and Resorts. Ladies and gentlemen, Kavitha Iyer. Welcome, Kavitha.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
It's so good to see you. It's so good to be speaking with you. I know how busy you are and with all of your travel. And I just know I'm just very excited for this conversation because, like I said, a hospitality hero to many. I go to any of these conferences or shows or all these things and places and people that we all know in common. We've only met each other a couple of times, but everyone that I know that's come across you always just says how incredible and gracious, and I don't know, they're overwhelming me with like adjectives about how wonderful you are. So I'm just happy to be here, and just in the little bit I've learned about you so far, I think you have a lot to teach us all about hospitality and creating comfortable places.
Oh, that's most generous of you. Thank you, Dan. No, I love that. I love the world that we're in hospitality. It's such a generous place to be, and it's really part of my esprit de corps, and I enjoy every minute of ever since I've been in it. So thank you for having me again.
You're very welcome. And I also wanted to dispel any prejudices that people might have about going to graduate school to learn everything that you learn, because in my conversations with you, where you really learned how to create and live and breathe creativity was not at a regular graduate school.
No.
And I'm so blown away and jealous of your life experience that I was really hoping you could kind of walk us through what Oroville is and was as an experience for you, and how it helped you become the hero to many.
Absolutely. Well, I do, several people know this, the few people I've told. I actually went back to India to do my undergraduate degree, and my undergraduate degree was in fact in architecture. And the 5-year program in India, at the time was known as University of Madras, now to many known as Chennai, southeast coast of India. In the 5-year program, one of the year was an apprenticeship year. So you would take 2 semesters out of your 3 semesters and go to an apprenticeship, and you could work in a regular designer architecture firm, or you could go try something on for size. And the objective was to really get real life practice in whatever format that you saw fit for your own future. And I had an unbelievable opportunity, both thanks to my mother, who did not kind of look at me and go, that's just not a great idea, which she could have said, because it wasn't the traditional route. I actually moved to this experimental town that's called Oroville, and it's about 3 hours south of Chennai. And it's this small little town that was established in the 1960s by a group of equal-minded creatives, experimentalists, makers, people who really believed that learning was a continuum. So one of the philosophies of the place is not only to bring people together for a better humanity, that was one of the main spiritual objectives, but entwined with that was a place of continuous learning, that learning is never complete. And also the sort of 360 idea of living is that you lived there, you worked there, you created there, you served there, and sort of had this full effect of how you lived and breathed the environment. And I happened to have this unbelievable opportunity to work with one of the resident architects there at the time, who was really an urban planner. And many of his projects were in the urban planning domain, and every so often we would have a small little project that we would work on in Oroville. And it was like a test project, right? So if you think about the maker environment today, you're fabricating different pieces of furniture. This was like whole buildings. You would test, concrete casting processes. You would test, integrating small chicken mesh with concrete to create first time, thin shell concrete shells. And some of them would fall down and some of them would stand, and you would learn through the process of really experimenting. And it cultivated what I call two things. One is really to take a risk and explore ideas, right? Like, you're never done. You should always ask the question. Just because it's done before in a certain way, it doesn't mean that it's right. And to really have an open mind for a lot of different people who bring ideas. So I think it really created that firsthand impression of that's sort of what I needed to enmesh in my daily practice as I approach design. And I came out of it far more richer than a traditional practice probably would have offered me at that time. And then I went back and graduated from my undergraduate degree, and then came to A&M.
So much of the creation and the practice, as you said, that's the one thing where you're creating. But I think what I love retreats, this is more than a retreat, because it wasn't just the practice. You were actually living, breathing, sleeping, everything, and creating and learning at the same time. So
it's a way of life.
Yeah. And then, so for that, and also like the most complete immersive experience of creation that I've heard of many, but this is like definitely up there. Like what was like a day in the life of Kavitha like there?
Well, it was very hot. It's close to the equator, this place. So your day would start very early. And I had chose to live in the small township of Pondicherry that was 30 minutes away from the campus of Oroville. And so you'd wake up at around 4:30, which for those who know me, I still wake up very early in the day. And you would go to the job site, because most of the things, the pre-prep work and things that you had to do on the job site, you wanted to end before 1 o'clock when the sun went high. And at that point, you would go back into a covered space or the office to go do office type work. So you'd start really early. You would start with some of the slurry mixes if you were building something or pouring or casting. So you would start doing the slurry before the heat started to coagulate the mix of cement so you could manage the heat. You would start pouring. You would be pour ready by around early morning, which is around 8:30, 9. And then you would go through any kind of fabrication techniques or casting, because you would do craftsmanship over the concrete, right? These are not commercial pieces of architecture. These are what I would call test pieces of architecture, and they are suited for the campus for which it's built, for the 5,000 residents there. So you would go through a crafting piece of mural drawing. In some cases, we would cast over other objects and take out some of the dirt from below. And then other parts of it would be artisanal, where we would kind of craft pieces of fiber. So there's this whole weaving group that we have. So those would become the bamboo facets that we would add to some of the fencing. So we would have to go manage some of that in the evening. So all of this would go on till around 1 o'clock. Then you go back to the office, grab a bite to eat, and then you would do some of the drafting work. So every one of us, because we were all interns and working interns, our drafting wasn't typical drafting. You wouldn't be drawing plans. Some of them would be doing some plans and elevations, which are typical orthographic hand drawn. This was pre computers and all of that. But my work was mostly to draw some of the urban planning documents, which are presentation documents. And there were these huge pieces of mylar. I remember they were, 12, 14 foot long by 6 feet tall, that you would roll out on large tables, and we would all be sitting perched on our little stools, and you would be drawing on the reverse side of the mylar between the trees and the buildings that would go in there, and the architect would come in and he would make a change, and then you would kind of scrape it with your little razor blade and take off the mylar and make the adjustments. But it was artistic focused, and it had a genuine agenda of really create as you go, test as you go, learn as you go. We would spend hours talking about why a certain space within the overall master plan was designed the way it was. Not just focused on the relevance of, some of the codified things that we were also trying to be trained in, but really understanding which side they were positioned in, the orientation of the building, why there were certain attributes of the building, how the landscaping flooded in, etc. So it was very immersive, and it was query based because we were asked to ask the questions, and the learning culture was phenomenal, which I still learn to appreciate, that you only can continue to learn if you ask questions. Learning is not finite. It's constant. I still don't know many things, and I love that because it makes me richer for wanting to know more. And then in the evening, to kind of end off the day, each one of us had another secondary apprenticeship where we would work with, they had restaurants as well as the food and beverage component of it, where many tourists would come and kind of eat there. So I worked in one of the restaurants of one of the architects, and you would cook in the kitchen, and you'd be given a different activity every day. One day you'd be washing dishes, the next day you'd be helping the line cook, the other day you'd be taking orders, and so variations on the theme, but it really gave you this enriched sensibility of how to live life and giving back, right, to the community that you lived in. And it was exhausting, but very fulfilling because you felt like you were learning all the time.
Yeah, learning, breathing, sweating, and of course, when you're doing the formed concretes parts, I'm sure it's all done with OSHA compliance in mind as well.
I don't believe there were many hard hats back when. I don't recall.
And all steel-toed shoes.
None of that. There were several people who didn't have any shoes at all. So yeah, it's a far cry from what I do today. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So you're living in this laboratory or ashram of complete creativity and immersiveness, right? How do you think that and at that point, you didn't know that you were going to have a career doing hospitality design to Marriott to IHG? Like, you had no idea that you would wind up in the hospitality world, right? So how did that experience inspire you to become who you are today and impacting all the people that you've impacted along your way?
Well, I think what I really learned through that process, other than just the joy of making, and impressing what I already love doing, making, was discipline, right? The discipline and the honing of the craft, right? You really have, if this is what I really wanted to do, which I kind of came out of it, doubled up in my fourth year, going into my fifth year to graduate, saying, yeah, I don't want to just graduate. I want to own this space, and I do want to continue along this path, but you needed to put in the work. It is a long road. And, I'd seen several other architects. I had distant relatives who were architects, and I saw their life and what they, not only the discipline that they cultivated, but the structure that you needed to have in a otherwise creative spirit, which is it engenders a lot of chaos, right? It welcomes a lot of chaos, but you need structure and you need discipline, and you need to love what you do, right? To really want it. And in living and breathing it, I couldn't see it any other way. And what I learned about the hospitality arm, is I did graduate in my fifth year with a thesis in tourism development based hospitality in India. And what kind of guided me towards that was it's just really living in a community like that. I mean, you're not just a guest, you're part of a community. You live in it, you welcome tourists every day, you see people, and then you welcome them. Everything you create is not just for yourself who live there, but also for the joy of others who come and enjoy it. Because when they see craft, there was something that really lit them up, right? They would talk about it. And this was in the years before you had a phone, you could take a picture. I mean, there would people be with your analog cameras, right? Your Canon AE1s walking around taking little pictures. And they were so excited, and they would query, and they wanted to know how it was. And they would sit and eat with us in our restaurant. You saw the joy that it brought to them. And you would have conversations that were so rich, people that you may never see again, but you realize that you could bring such fulfillment, right, to their lives as just being, having contributed to that, right, to some aspect of their joy. And I think that's what hospitality is. You are generous with your time, and you're generous with your sensibilities, and it brings immense joy that you can only see at that moment in time, right? When that person enjoys a meal, or there's a smile on their face, or you see them discovering something. And that's what I do in my life right now, from small to big. And I think that sort of set the tone for that.
Okay. And then if to go on, I love how you said like that query-based learning. So if I were to kind of Socratically ask you, how did you perceive what hospitality was before that experience to after having lived and gone and been there, and it set you on that path to where you are now? Like, how do you contrast what your idea of hospitality was then to what it is now?
Well, pre my Oroville days. Well, so for me, I had a very interesting childhood, and I credit my parents with everything I have today. I mean, they are the reason I am, and then some more. My father had an unbelievably cool career where he moved from India in the 60s to the United States, and really wanted to pursue a career in petrochemical engineering back in the late 60s. And in that pursuit, in the late 70s and 80s, found a career that moved him to the Middle East to build, cities of the future that were based on these sort of larger oil based tenements. And we lived there. And as part of being an expat, we had a very interesting lifestyle where you'd go to school for probably 6 months out of the year, and then you would have 6 months of time off to either go back to the country that you came from, or family time, or excursion, or what they called excursion, or tour or travel time. And my parents, who were sort of pioneers at heart and explorers themselves, really wanted to explore the world. And they had their little books, and we would travel about 4 months out of the year, and 2 months they would go back to their own country to visit their parents. And so I was part of that, and I lived that life for quite a bit of my early childhood till my early middle school years, and cultivated this life of living in hotels. So my early journey of hospitality was really this. I equated being in hotels and travel to the most happiest time of my life. Right? I came at it as a guest. I came at it as a child. Everything was new. When you're a child, you discover everything for the first time. And this was predates the time of when you had childcare at these hotels. For this over the few times. And my mother is very keen on pointing this out. She's like, we only did that a few times, Kavitha. We didn't do that all the time. But they would leave me at the hotel with the housekeeping or any of the staff or the front desk. But it was discovery for me. I enjoyed that. There's nothing like a kid being able to sit behind the front desk and see, what happens when they greet guests, and then sit and fold napkins and, learn how to fold those napkins, right? Or to be in the back of house with the machines where the laundry is folding these things automatically, and you're like, oh wow, that's so
Those
cool.
Things are amazing. Yeah.
Can I press the button? I mean, to the one time, my favorite time, which I don't think anyone would do anymore, but I think there was this pigeon that got stuck in one of the exhaust vents, and I got to go on the roof and get this bird that was stuck in the exhaust vent on the roof. And it was, I mean, for a young person, these are far more intriguing than going to a historical site. I mean, nowadays, I go back to the places that my parents took me with hopes that I would learn, but I enjoyed staying at the hotel far more because it was every day was a revelation. And what I really enjoyed ultimately above all of that discovery was just, I go back to the word generosity, right? I just, every person treated you so well, and they treated everybody they met so well. They would always greet them, say, how are you doing? Can we get you anything? Which you see even today, right? Is everything going okay, Mr. or Mrs.? Can we get you anything? And they're so kind, right? I mean, they make you feel so special, and you carry that with you, right? I mean, even today when I meet someone else, like, how are you? How are you doing? Are you doing okay? And I want to know about you. How was your day? What did you do? Um, and that I learned that from these fabulous people that I met in all these hotels all over the world. And so I equate being in a hotel as the best years of my time. And even today I enjoy it. I enjoy seeing that the smile that you have, the effusive smile at the front desk. And every time I pass by, someone saying, are you having a good day? It's the small things.
It's interesting on the how are you question and really listening. So often, if just from my experience, someone will say, how are you? I'm great, a little tired, like kind of surface level. And I was talking to someone the other day. He was a former guest on the podcast, Damon Lawrence, and he's like, "How are you?" I was like, "Oh, great, like busy, travel." And he goes, "How are you personally?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"Whoa!" And it made me stop and think. And I was like, "Whoa!" And then we had like a 45-minute conversation, right?
Yeah.
And I think that to really because so much of that whole idea of in hospitality and greeting and like the first impression, it can be very surface, and it's like whether it's design or greeting or questioning, it's like how do you get down to that deeper level to really figure out where the magic is?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's also culturally, right? I mean, for me, living in the Middle East, but also culturally being Indian, we were a community of people. I mean, now we're all a blended society. We all kind of mingle and mix, but back in the day, there's a very, engendered group of Indian community that my parents had as close friends in Houston, where we lived originally. And these were family, these were friends. And the way they would just greet people, even in their own homes, right? They would open up their doors, people would come stay with us. My mother would spend hours trying to get the room ready. She would give them the best room, like the best of the linens on the bed. And the lamps that she would just fuss over and the right lighting levels. And she's not a designer by any means, but just those thoughtful things. And she would welcome them as soon as they came home. She'd be like, do you need something to drink? Do you want something to eat? I mean, they wouldn't even come through the front door, right? She's just so effusive to make people feel like they've arrived. That, again, going back to making people feel that they're wanted, that they're more than just relevant, right? That they're special. And that was something culturally that also I observed my parents doing, and my extended family kind of offering when we used to go visit them in India. And it was just the endless food. We used to actually joke about it, right? Never visit your entire family all day, because you will not be able to eat for the next few days. You need like a break, because
Totally.
you're just completely showered with everything, whether it's food or gifts. And you come out of these homes so rich and fulfilled, just spiritually, right? And it comes from so there was a lot to be learned from those early years.
So okay, so then you have those early years, and now fast forward to where you are now, and I totally feel and see what your idea of hospitality was then. Like, so now you've been on this totally non-linear path, right, to where you are now, right? It's really, I don't know, I'm just very jealous by your path. But you get like to where you are now, the person I'm speaking to now. How do you how do you define hospitality from then to how you are now?
So in my past, you and I have spoken about this earlier. In the Indian culture, there's this term that's called Atithi Devo Bhava, which means guest is God. And it comes from a Sanskrit phrase, and it comes from sort of a spiritual context of where it's respect, right? It's respect for elders, it's respect for your family, it's respect for your teacher learning, and it's respect for your guest. And the tenet of family to teacher to your guest, that is part of the core way you see life, is in fact what I do for a living right now. Is I'm in service of what I would love for our guests to feel, right? And I've done that as a designer outside of larger, broader companies like I work for now, as well as where I am right now. And everything fundamentally wants to see that joy, right? And that feeling of inclusion and that feeling of generosity that they take away with them, that unbelievable memory that they go back home, that they want to do again, all over again, because it was offered to them. And in some ways, it's because they probably felt very exalted, right? Like the terminology of God or that higher being is that putting them on that pedestal, right? That they're the best thing, they're the most important thing, they're above and beyond, is what we try to, I think, all cultivate. And that's where I am today. And it's, when you hear about, a good review from a guest, or you look back at some of your brands and you go, we love this, or this was the best thing, it's unimaginably fulfilling, right? Like something that you had to be a part of, and you might have been just a tiny part of, that you were able to influence that in some small way, is there's nothing that can displace it. And that's the connection I make from what I learned from not only my family and where I culturally come from, but also my travels and the things that were impressed upon me to know.
The idea that guest is God, right? It's really ultimately putting ourselves as a host second, right? And I'm getting that so much from so many of these conversations. I haven't heard it in that fashion, but I really like it. And I mean, how do you say it again?
Atithi Devo Bhava.
That's right. And then Aditi, I was saying, I have a friend named Aditi, and now I have deeper meaning to what her name is. Okay. And then, okay, so you go from Oroville, and then I remember you were, and I looked this up on the internet after you told me, but how did you wind up involved at Arcosanti, and what was that all about?
So when I came to grad school at A&M, my focus was, again, I did a minor in development to understand tourism as an economic driver. That was sort of my focus, right? Just to understand what is the travel industry, and what are the economics behind the travel industry, because I realized up until then I had a very creative focus, right? So I could really excel in that. I knew how to do it. But I very quickly realized that you can't really make the impact unless you understand some of the background, sort of the business aspects of it. So I wanted to really focus on that. So I came to A&M with a focus on that, and that was what my graduate degree was about: design, architecture, as well as this. But in my second year, I decided during the summer break I wanted to do something rather than going and working in a design firm. I found a sister experimental city / town here, north of Phoenix, in Arcosanti,
and it's kind of like a Taliesin
it's
West.
A Taliesin. Paolo Soleri worked at Taliesin West with Frank Lloyd Wright for many years, and then he moved from there and established his own future city of the world, to kind of enmesh architecture with ecology. So hence Arcosanti. And he did this in the 1970s, and again, as an experimental town, created it in concert with some of the concepts. So there was a lot of ties between Oroville and Arcosanti. They had several members who would go back and forth between the towns in the early parts, but it was really an open invitation to students as a place of learning, as a place of querying and learning. And again, very similar to Oroville, the lifestyle that I kind of spoke about was what they created, what they had, and you lived and breathed in Arcosanti. And I think a lot of it was a takeaway from Taliesin to a good deal, because back then in your apprenticeship, you would live on the camp, you would live and work with Frank Lloyd Wright, and in some ways be able to take your expression from the place that you lived in, right? So this was no different. You took the expression of where you lived in this mesa surrounded by these gorgeous red sands and cliffs and plateaus, and built of the earth, right? So there was a lot of techniques that that actually were very fundamental to Arcosanti. They had the silt cast techniques that were first developed there, where you could cast concrete and then you would dig out all the dirt and you would have painted on the surface of the dirt. So when you removed it, you would have these gorgeous painted walls, very similar to the petroglyphs from back then. So you were simulating things that you found from the past into the future. And it was very fulfilling. It was a slightly different mechanism where the group was smaller. It wasn't 5,000 large at the time. It was a group of 75 individuals, and a majority of them were students. And many people who went on to practice now, some who took different industries, but it was a group of artists and artisans and a few architects. And we would build, and we had a good portion of the day where we'd craft. We would cast bells, silt cast bells, bronze bells, and then we would actually provide tour groups too. So that's where I also learned in a different way to interact with the guest who would experience the environment. And they would tour up to, like, I think they had a number about 40,000 people who would come and go in and out of the property. They would travel up north and go see this city of the future at the time, pre-millennia. And it was just very fulfilling, because they would again discover through the lens of people like us who would make and create and had something to say. And we just didn't have, it wasn't observational, right? Because we made it, right? We had a part in it. And so there was a sense of, what I learned from being there was a true sense of ownership. In addition to the joy of making, you owned the fact that you were part of something bigger. Something that in my younger years, I think I was so focused on just the attributes of making and the joy of making, you lose sight of how you can own things. But this true joy of being able to own, and pride was something I learned, and the pride of making and the pride of joy of sharing that with others was something Paulo Soleri engendered. So that was fascinating, and that was for about 6 months. It was my summer, and then I extended into one semester, and then went back and graduated, thankfully, much to my parents' pleasure, so that I did go back and graduate finally. But it was a very equally, if not tremendous, learning experience for me. And in many ways we're very similar, query based, right? You would ask questions. Why not was a thing that Paulo would always, he would really encourage all of us to ask. He would state what we were trying to do, and then he would go around and say, and he would only have a good response to the one person who would say, well, why not this?
Yeah.
And I think that was when I started to learn this idea of, you had to feel the sense of ownership to know that you had permission to ask, why not something else, which a lot of us, which is a life lesson as well. It wasn't just focused on hospitality, but it was a good life lesson to learn.
Well, I was saying this whole query-based learning and that Socratic method. Recently, I reread, as you're talking, I was reminded, I recently reread Plato's Republic, where Plato is basically writing a story, a narrative from his teacher, Socrates, about really what this utopian Greece or society could really look like. Some's cool, some's really messed up, but it's this whole idea, this like weird utopian vision, which is, you go into Frank Lloyd Wright and some of his urban planning, utopian planning, out to Aldous Huxley, to Taliesin, to Arcasante, and then also it's I don't know, I just feel like you're so lucky to have experienced that, because the only thing top of mind that I know of people that are doing right now for a short period of time, something like a Burning Man, where, okay, yeah, it's a big fun party, but they're also creating, there's a lot of art and creation and communal living. And I just feel like there's a real need for that. And I think everything's gotten so institutional as far as that normal path, that I don't know, I just find it inspiring. And now I'm curious about what would it be like to go. I mean, I go on retreats here and there, but nothing like an extended sabbatical where you're like really living in commune with others. It's just, it's awe-inspiring, actually. And I think, you're interviewing a ton of people, you're seeing the next generation come up. Do you know of a lot of, or are there many other people who are coming up through the ranks, so to speak, that have had these types of experiences?
It's
Are you
interesting.
drawn to them?
It's interesting you should ask. Auburn University actually has a rural studio program, which and they have this architecture, interior design combination program, which I think they do in addition to architecture program. And we have several candidates, for years that we've seen who come from that program, which I think is probably the closest to that. And it is in a rural part of Alabama, where the students are given a semester or a year. I don't know the exact time frame, where a select group of students can apply, and they live there and they work and they learn and hone their craft. And it's very query cultivating. I have some personal friends who actually went to that program for me several years ago, and they absolutely loved the environment, because it takes you away from the everyday of, where, yes, you can learn codes, yes, you can learn rules, standards, all of that will come when you're in practice, right? But the thing that schools still don't teach, other than the tools that you learn to do design with, is how to ask the question, how to rephrase the question, right? How to feel bold and brave and make mistakes, with confidence, and I think those are tools that places like I believe the rural studio environment are offering. And so we do meet. I mean, I've had several candidates in the past, and I think I do have a couple of people who actually work for me who have been part of that and are extremely talented, right? You can immediately, their conversations will go back to that sort of why not approach, which I love that. I welcome that. For me, there is no one answer to anything in anything that we do. And as part of the design strategy arm, we actually are the in-house arm that creates things. You have to, and in a large company, right, where you have goals, you need those people to ask the why nots, be bold to take risks, because otherwise it's not really an added advantage to have that creative arm. So I've seen those, and I think that's one of the schools I know about. I'm not sure if there's other environments.
I think that's a great point, is that's the one school that you've heard of. I'm sure there are more, but it's almost as if I find it also reassuring in the sense that, in some of these recent conversations I've been having, some of the guests, they grew up with learning differences, right? So they were very challenged in that normal linear path, but because of luck or their parents or whatever, they were able to find these places where the ways that they could find an environment within, or where the way that they saw the world backwards, forwards, differently, they could excel and like be the next. And I think that also goes, like, we're all crammed into this kindergarten through senior to high school or vocational school to college, whatever. It's a very linear path. And if you're not a normal learner, or not, or you don't see the world in like that linear way, you're kind of left out to dry. And it's interesting that there's not a lot more resources like this with these alternative learners, because I would argue that your experiences were probably way, everything is relative, but just a much richer and different experience than, you know, going to 4 years of undergrad, another couple of years of graduate school for architecture, going out as a apprentice and working and going like that linear path. And I don't know, I think that as everyone is just so different in how they learn, that I just wish that there were more outlets like this. It's inspiring. I get goosebumps actually thinking about them.
No, you're right. And I think nowadays, one of the things that I'm seeing, in addition to not having avenues like this, right? Even in an apprenticeship environment where you go to a community and you get to live, breathe, and work. Some of the other things I talk about with some of our younger candidates, or when I am speaking to some younger mentees, is, you know, think about things that you can do that are outside of the profession, right? If you're approaching design, architecture, what have you, are there adjacent things that you can do where you can explore the sort of facet of making, creating? And it could be anything, right? It could be in theater, it could be in stage sets where you're crafting and assembling things for an audience to appreciate for one night. It can be in showroom design, right? In window design. I met the other day, I met someone who had done showrooms for anthropology, and what a great opportunity for a young person immediately out of school, right? You have a voice. They have a variety of programs in anthropology of what they want to do, but there's this intense creative arm that goes into creating the things that we see in the window, right? In their retail window. And what a wonderful trajectory. And if you pull that into hospitality, that's unbelievable. If I can think of the things that we can draw on for pop-ups or for holidays, the things that we do in hospitality environments that aren't just focused on everyday things that we have to do, right? It's not a renovation, it's not a conversion, but other things that are above and beyond, that they could have a home and could really offer us some richer ways of looking at it. So try to think of other trajectories that might inform your decision, because there really is no one route, right, to this. You're right. Back when there was only one path to this. You went to school, you trained, you got your licenseship, and then you did the work, and you kind of moved up, and then, you know, you ended your days. And I think that was great for many, for those who did it really well, and, you know, we were all richer for it. But one of the things to ask yourself is, you know, depending on who you are and what your talents are, there may be far richer ways for you to pursue that same trajectory with much success, based on different things you can do, right? You don't have to sit in the office all day. Maybe there's a different avenue you can pursue and meet different people and find your own voice of creativity, which for me is a far bigger value add than the same thing, right? Like we're looking for someone with a different edge, right? What do you bring to the table that none of us have? And that's the magic sauce, right?
Totally.
So I think that's something to take away, the trajectory. Think about
I
it.
love it. Okay, so your circuitous path, your supporting parents, the way that they made you feel here, then you're working in a design firm, you work at Marriott, now you're at IHG. Like, what is, and as you're looking at and taking your life experience, like what's exciting you most from your vantage right now as you're charting a course forward?
You know, the excitement for me is how hospitality constantly keeps reimagining itself, right? Because the guest at every turn is expecting something else. And what's far more intriguing to me now in the generation that we're in is how our newer guests, when I talk about newer guests, our next generation of guests, have everything on demand. They are so exposed to all the things I talked about. Like I had to take a trip around the world to feel all that, right? You don't have to do that. you are able to really immerse yourself in that imaginative space so that when they go to on their business trip, their first business trip, or when they have buying power, their expectation is beyond. And I think that's exciting. That's like a supreme challenge, right? Like how do we really think about how to how to make discovery all over again for this highly challenging group of individuals? And
Totally.
also, it's not just limited to that generation, right? I mean, everybody has access to it, and being able to not just do it better, but to make it special at every turn, right? Because I think there's also this notion of all things should be the same. It's not the case, right? There's needs for every different market segment, which is what I love about companies like where I'm working, because you can actually really look at it from one end to another, right? And really be able to address it in a variety of different ways, but at the same time keeping at the heart of it the message of you want to make it special for that particular need, right? And don't get complacent, right? Don't get complacent in that you've got there, right? That these guests keep you on your toes at every step of the way. You know, there is a reason brand companies look at this and look at it, you know, our work is cut out for us. It's by the minute. By no means when they launch something is it done, right? They're already thinking about it ahead of people going, well, have you thought about this? Oh yeah, we've already thought about the 30 other things.
Totally.
We're on it. But it's exciting, right? Because again, it's query based.
Yeah.
It's
So
concept.
as you're talking, two things are jumping into my mind. One is, which totally resounds with me, was whatever's gotten us as people or organizations to where we are at this moment, that's not going to serve us going forward, right? It gives us a foundation, but we continually need to adapt and improve to the changing psychographic of everything and demographic of everything. The other thing that resonated was or is this idea, and actually I was very pleased to see that you find this challenge exciting, because I find it actually daunting, where everyone has everything at their fingertips, right? So there's no surprises in theory. But the way that you said it is like, yeah, there are surprises. You just got to know how to deliver them and how to find them, knowing that there are no surprises.
Yeah.
It's almost like we've entered the upside down. But like when my wife is planning a trip, I don't like to be super involved because I don't want to see what everything looks like. I like suspending disbelief. That's just me. And I like the surprise. I like it when things go sideways because that's exciting and it's a really great memory. But I don't know. I'm impressed by your excitement over that challenge.
Well, it makes you not, it pulls you away from complacency, right? There's nothing more, there's nothing more terrible to double up on that is than being complacent and believing that it's it, right? Like you've arrived. And that goes for everything that we do in our own lives, because that's not what brings continuous joy, right? We are constantly evolving, and for me, in my where I am in my life today, I put myself in the shoes of all of these young people, and I learn so much every day from my team. It was a group of very young, creative, unbelievably creative crew, and I learn every day from them through their eyes, through the lens of what they believe is the thing, right? What made them amazed? What jazzes them? And frankly, the things that jazz me don't jazz them, right? And I want to know, and I want to know why. And to me, that exploration is what is exciting in larger companies like this, because you've never arrived, right? And
Totally.
and the fact that you have the opportunity to do better, which I think is also a mantra that I carry close to my heart. You can do better, right? Yes, you're doing great, but you can do better. Will push you to lead that sort of environment, right? And I think guests appreciate that, because they also don't like complacency, right? No one likes a tired place where you're like, well, that's all you get. Anyone who's worked in a hotel environment will tell you, there's a guest that goes to their room and they're like me, will pick up the phone and go, do you have this? Do you have that? What time does that open? I have questions, and every one of those queries is different for the millions of people that travel every day, because you're displaced, you're uncomfortable. And the one thing that makes it better is where you are, right? The one thing that you have at your advantage is that space. And we have the unbelievable power to make that one thing better for them. And
totally. Until you hang up the phone and 3 seconds later you get a text message that says, hey, how did I do?
I know. We
And
could do better on that. We could do better.
And remember, I just found out from my daughter, speaking about like, I'm intrigued by what the next generation finds interesting or offensive. I just found out, I gave my daughter via text like a thumbs up, and she did not like that. She's like, apparently the thumbs up emoji is a no more. So,
well, that's good to know. I've learned something today.
Yeah, exactly. So for all of you communicating with 14-year-olds, don't use a thumbs up emoji. Apparently, it is a sign of boredom and lack of engagement. It's just a flippant way to acknowledge something.
I can see that. It's lazy.
Yeah. And then I was like, well, what if I write something and put a period at the end of the sentence? And she's like, no, don't use punctuation. That's rude. And I'm like, oh my God.
Well, look,
how do I do this?
I'm willing to hear, I'm willing to listen. I'm here for it,
See, you're a better person than I am.
Well, we were all them at one point, right, Dan? We were them.
Totally. We were.
So we can learn from the next crew.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, this is David Bowie has this song Changes, Changes,
Yeah.
You know that one? Where and there's some lyric in there that's like, yeah, these kids, don't worry about them because they're going to figure out their own future. And because like we're trying to like just understand what's going on for us, they're going a different path, and we just got to be cool with that.
I mean, there is no memorializing one pathway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because nowadays you have the advantage of pursuit, and that pursuit has made them far richer, right? And that's the world that we're living in, their world, and I love that.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So Kavitha, this has been awesome. Like, if people wanted to learn more about you and like what you guys are up to, like what's the best way for them to find you or learn more about IHG and kind of what you guys have going on?
Absolutely. Well, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, obviously, tried and true. You can also follow me on my Instagram page. I do try to post as much as possible about everything that we're doing that's cool behind, without giving you away too much of the secret sauce, but giving you little peeks into our everyday world of creativity. And obviously at ihg.com, all the new openings and things that we're doing globally. And feel free, where I live, and I will always take a message, and I'm always happy to meet you. And if you come to DC, you will find me running on the weekends at Rock Creek. So always happy to feel free to connect with me if you are interested in a run.
Oh, definitely. One question I forgot to ask you, which I always like to ask, and I think let's go back to Oroville. You're there, you're wearing flip-flops, you're casting concrete. But the you that I'm speaking to right now appears in front of your younger self before you go on this circuitous journey to where you are now. What advice do you have for yourself?
Wow. I think I would have told myself, be resilient. Because when you're young, you don't know resilience, right? You go day to day, and sometimes exhaustion would hit you, and I didn't have the confidence I did at the time. But I would have said, keep on the path, be resilient. That's what I would have told myself, to help myself through my everyday, because I know how it felt back then. And something bigger than me allowed to keep me on that path, but it would have been helpful to have had that advisor tell me that day in, day out. Be resilient.
Yeah, resiliency is pretty awesome. And I don't know how to teach it. It's got to be like learned on your own.
Yeah, just, you have to be, there's so many that come before you that have knowledge, right?
Mm.
And you may not agree with everything that they have to offer, but there's a richness to where they come from, right? And that thing, feedback, that's what I tell my team. Sometimes when you hear feedback, it's hard. And as young people, especially those in architecture and design school, they get it all the time, right? You charrette, you
Oh, and the
present,
crits,
somebody hates your design. But if you're taught resilience and you're advised resilience, you'll know that you are going to be far more richer for it, right? Because it comes from a place of wisdom. Somebody's offering a few thoughts because they have some wisdom that is beyond what you have, or even might offer you food for thought for changing the way you think. But you have to be willing to be open to it and not let it beat you up, because there's a bigger journey, and the journey is rich, and it's fabulous, and it's grand. Like I see my life, I think it's grand. So yes, resiliency.
Love it. Resiliency. Kavitha, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I mean, this has just been a wonderful conversation. I can't wait to run with you. I can't wait to see you in New York City for BDNY coming up. And thank you so much for your time and experience. I think it benefits all of us.
Well, thank you, Dan. Always a great time chatting with you, and see you soon.
Yeah. And I'm here today with Emily Kipe, who is the Senior Vice President of Design Services for Hyatt Hotels Corporation in Chicago. And just wanted to check in with you really quickly, Emily, about BDNY and what you love about it.
Great. Well, excited to talk to you about that. I love to go to BDNY. It's one of my favorite trade shows. In fact, probably my favorite. There's so much creativity, and you see a really curated assortment of products and booths and vendors and brands that are all geared towards the lifestyle area of what we're doing. So I think that's what makes it really fun, is you see a ton of new ideas at the show. Particularly design spaces, I would say, and it looks like that's your segue.
Yeah, so that's my perfect segue, because I remember last year specifically sitting with you in the Unapologetically Thompson booth that you guys did, and you guys had such amazing content. It was obviously very well designed, but it was such a gathering place where I just wound up learning a lot. So if you speak about, like, from your experience doing that Unapologetically Thompson booth, what did you and your team, and I think also the industry, get out of that?
Right. So we loved doing the booth, and it was unapologetically Thompson. I think Thompson as a brand does not want to compromise what it's all about, or what the design aesthetic or kind of backbone of the brand is. So what we did for this booth is we came up with a concept, and the concept was a High Line in New York City. So the whole booth was based on what would a Thompson hotel lounge be like if it were designed for the High Line in New York City. And we take cues from the architecture of that, from the materials, and sort of the overall vibe of the place. So in doing that, we ended up building a booth that was, 600 tons of steel in the booth. And it was quite a challenge to build, incredibly heavy, but so authentic for what we wanted to do. The centerpiece of the booth was a big bar, obvious for Thompson. So we had a great time there. And as you noted, it was a real gathering place where people wanted to come in, have a drink. We had signature cocktails that we designed outside of the typical, convention menu for the booth that were specific to Thompson. And we had our mixology team work on those cocktails. We had our own Thompson DJ there spinning music. And we had lots of sessions in the booth to highlight our team and all of their hard work on it.
And additionally, aside from just the space, the structure, and the design of it, I remember walking away thinking about, I think it was, and I can't remember if it was you or Sarah who introduced me to the head of F&B for Hyatt or for Thompson. I forget his name, but he basically was saying, for any new bar or restaurant going in, if they're not spending a lot of time and effort developing their non-alcoholic or mocktails or whatever they're calling it, the hotel or the the venue is kind of missing the boat, because it was like a real learning thing for me. I didn't think that such an effort was being put into developing cocktails for a different wellness and lifestyle.
Right. So Frank Giacomini is our head of, restaurant, bars, and events. And he is passionate about, doing the zero proof lifestyle. And it's obviously something that we're all interested in, taking care of our own health, having a good time when you want to have a good time, but also focusing on different lifestyle choices and being inclusive to, people that are looking out for their health or have their own reasons for not indulging in the alcohol.
Totally. And again, in the early part of this conversation, you mentioned that, lifestyle, and I think we've said lifestyle about 4 or 5 times, and why BDNY is so great for lifestyle. What do you think specifically as it pertains to lifestyle separates BDNY from the rest of all the shows that are out there?
Well, I think the other shows, you take Vegas, for instance, right? HD Vegas is larger shows, more vendors that really are providing product kind of for the masses, and you're going to get a much larger assortment of product vendors. I think BDNY is much more curated. It's a little bit smaller. I think the quality of what you see, there always seems to be new product launches. People are focused on the experience of delivering those products, and even in their booth design. So I think it does a great job, as you look around the trade show, interesting things to look at, not just the products themselves, but the way that they're displayed.
I couldn't agree more. And again, there's a place for everything, but I think on the curated side, I think that's really what I agree with you. BDNY does separate. And I'm just so excited to get together with everyone in mass again. And I'm so excited to see you, and thank you. And I can't wait to see you there.
Yeah, can't wait to see you.
And also, I don't want to forget our listeners, because again, we keep growing every week. It's humbling. It's amazing. If this has changed your idea on a path or a journey or hospitality, please share it with someone else who you think would benefit. Thank you, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.